Hi everyone, how's it going? We're really sorry for being a few minutes late. We had a few technical difficulties. Really apologize for that. Hello, sorry. Again, we had some technical difficulties. That happens in today's world. We're all online, so it happens. Great to have you. Because we are a few minutes late, I'm just gonna roll right through what I gotta talk through real quick. All right. So hi everyone, while we're getting settled real quick, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Zoom. If you're new to Zoom webinar, I'm going to run through a few things to quickly familiarize you. You'll notice your microphone is muted. That's why we can't hear you talk. And that is because with so many of us here together, it's best to give everyone the best chance to hear clearly without each other's background noise. Throughout this webinar, there are two ways to interact with us, through the Q&A or the chat box. With hundreds of you on this webinar right now, we've decided it's best to hold all questions until the end of the webinar to ensure we have enough time to get through everything. After Paloma and Peter's presentations, we'll go straight into Q&A for about 15 minutes. If you have a question for Paloma or Peter or anything related to the presentation, please type your question into the Q&A box below and that black toolbar on the bottom of your computer screen. If you're using a smart device, such as an iPad, the toolbar may be at the top of your screen. Go ahead and just give your mouse a little wiggle if you don't see that, and it should come up. If you have a question for me about Zoom or about Friends, maybe you'd like to receive emails about how to get involved or stay updated with future webinars, please type your question into the chat box. If you accidentally leave a question for Paloma or Peter in that chat box, please know it may be missed because we are watching the Q&A. To ask me a question in the chat box, see the chat icon, again at the bottom of your screen. Type your question and click enter to send. Please know, unless you send this question directly only to me, everyone on the webinar will be able to see your question. For the largest viewing options of your speaker on your computer screen, click that speaker view button at the top right hand of your Zoom screen. That will just enable whoever is speaking to be the main face or screen you see. We are recording this webinar and we'll post the video online soon within a few days for folks who were unable to make it with us tonight. Every one of Friends' webinars are posted on our YouTube channel as well as our website at gorgefriends.org. And then I just have to take care of one thing here and promote one of our speakers to a panelist here. All right, that should work. Sorry, folks, give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. All right, I think that wraps up most of the Zoom items. I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. Give me a little nod if you can. All right, thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives to join us this evening. We have a great discussion ahead of us about photography and storytelling and the power of documenting people and places, how photography can be used as a tool to empower and advocate. Our presenters are two professional photographers who have worked in the Gorge and around the world. This webinar tonight was also created in celebration of launching our 6th annual photo contest, Picturing Protection, which we hope you submit photos to before December 31st. Whether you are a beginner or senior photographer, we'd love to see your entries. Go to our website, gorgefriends.org/photo contest. And Ryan, if you'd like to input that into the chat box for folks, that would be really helpful so that they can check it out if they'd like to. My name is Natasha Stone and I am your host tonight. I am the Community Engagement Specialist at Friends of the Columbia Gorge. As Friends' Community Engagement Specialist, I manage our outdoor youth education efforts and work to build a diverse and inclusive network of community partners to help protect, preserve, and steward the Columbia Gorge. With me is our featured speakers, Paloma Ayala and Peter Marbach. Paloma Ayala is a graphic designer and photographer. She serves on the board of directors of Columbia Riverkeeper and The Next Door. Paloma earned a master's degree in conflict resolution and has a long history of nonviolence work in Mexico. She lives with her husband, Patrick, and son, Oliver, in Hood River, Oregon, and spends as much time outdoors as she can. Peter Marbach's evocative landscapes reflect time spent working with light at the edges of day. He has produced 6 photo essay book projects, including 2019's Healing the Big River, Salmon Dreams, and the Columbia River Treaty, and has had a diverse list of clients from National Geographic to Travel Oregon. His work is part of a permanent collection at Oregon State University. Before I hand it off to Paloma and Peter, I wanted to talk a little bit about Friends and how we're all here right now for anyone who may have been invited to this webinar by a friend and are still getting to know who we are. Friends of the Columbia Gorge is the only conservation group entirely dedicated to protecting, preserving, and stewarding the gorge. Friends led the fight to protect the gorge by helping create the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area over 40 years ago, and it's been working ever since to safeguard the gorge and make sure the natural wonders found today will be preserved for generations to come. Friends is entirely dedicated to protecting and enhancing the scenic, natural, cultural, and recreational resources in the gorge. If you've been enjoying our gorgeous wildlife webinars, we've got a really exciting one coming up next week on Wednesday, November 18th at 5 p.m. about a fish that I bet you've never heard of. Meet the Columbia River's most ancient elder, lamprey. Friends has partnered with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission to talk to you about the oldest fish that is still alive today and native to the Pacific Northwest. With fossils found dating back more than 400 million years ago, lamprey have survived mass extinctions, but are still struggling to overcome continued habitat destruction, water pollution, and dam passages, just to name a few. Lori Porter, John Hess, and Jeremy Five Crows from the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission will talk to us about why these fish are important ecologically and how they are a first food for tribes in the Columbia River Basin, providing cultural, physical, and medicinal health to communities. Cryptic will tell us about their successful restoration program that is helping keep these critical ancient fish in the rivers. Don't miss it, Wednesday, November 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific. With that, I am going to hand it off to Peter Marbach, our first speaker here. Hopefully he can share his screen as I just stopped sharing mine. Peter, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Share screen. Okay. Ready to go?
Ready for it. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. This delay is all my fault. For whatever reason, couldn't get into Zoom, so I'm going to skip a lengthy little intro I had in mind when we can save it for Q&A for afterwards. So off we go. So here I am on the summit of Mount Hood. This is a place I visited probably 25 times in the last 30 years. To get this particular image, I had to climb through the night to get up there just before sunrise. And initially I was just looking for a pure landscape shot, but this other climber came up and stood on the top. And initially I was a little bit miffed that he was there. I was like, get out of my shot. I want a pure landscape shot. But then as I looked at it, it was really quite lovely because it shows the humanity, the scale, his celebration of climbing through the night to witness sunrise on the top of Mount Hood. So this is why I climb Mount Hood all the time. And not only that, but at the same time that this is happening, you look to the west and this amazing pyramid shadow is forming. So I'm standing there spinning back and forth on the edge of a cornice ridge with my crampons on, trying to make sure that I don't fall, but witnessing all this stuff because it's all happening within the span of a minute. And I swear, when you're standing there, it feels like the sun was like beaming through my soul. And that's what the soul, it looks like it's projected. I know that sounds all woo-woo, but that's how it felt. It was just very emotional. So that's why I climb again and again and again, because I know there's magic up high. And speaking of other high places, this is one of my other favorite views. This is from the summit of South Sister in Central Oregon. And this particular image has great meaning to me. I underwent an unexpected triple bypass open heart surgery 19 years ago. And on this particular day, I honored my anniversary and my second chance on life by standing there at 5 a.m. on the summer solstice to see all the volcanoes going all the way up to Mount Rainier. So it's quite a fantastic place to go. And again, with photography, it's all about the light. This image too also has some personal poignancy to me. It occurred at a time when my mother was dying, and I was turning to the gorge and Mount Hood for healing and comfort. And I had been studying the fact that the moon was going to be rising around this time. So I waded into the water near Cigar Rock near Cape Horn and just waited patiently until after the sun had gone down And so this sort of ethereal blue color is all natural. There's no touch up. I mean, I don't really mess around with Photoshop at all, but just one of the more beautiful images I've ever been fortunate enough to witness in the gorge. This was not an image I was trying to take. I was still shooting film like maybe 10 years ago, and I had my big Pentax medium format camera, and I was trying to get a shot of Spirit Falls, just a nice landscape shot. And all of a sudden, off in the distance, I could hear voices, and I was like, "Huh, what's going on?" So I looked up at the top of Spirit Falls, and I saw this kayaker coming. So I literally like ran like maybe 50 yards or so. But anyone who's ever stood down there, there's no real safe spot to run. It's like just spongy, mossy stuff. And at any point you could fall right through it. But I was able to grab my little camera and just get one shot just in time to capture the magic of this person plunging over Spirit Falls. So over the years, I have, as I've driven down I-84 going to Portland, I've always looked up at St. Peter's Dome in Ainsworth State Park and wondered what the view would be like way up high. But the question was, how do you get up there? How, you know, what's the process? So I recruited a friend of mine who's a mountaineer, and we went up Horsetail Falls and then up toward Ponytail Falls, and there's a trail that takes you up to, I think it's called the Rock of Ages. And then we just kept going up and up a hill until finally we got to a spot where we could almost see, but there were too many trees in the way. So my friend had a harness and a rope, and I'm not real experienced with this, so he lowered me over the edge of a cliff. And I'm just dangling there like in midair, and I'm turning back to my friend. I'm like, "Jerry, you got me, right? You got me." I mean, I was like so scared, but my goodness, to be able to get this view was pretty fantastic, looking down, looking east toward Bonneville Dam. And this is from near the summit of Dog Mountain. As you all know, Dog Mountain is probably the premier place to see wildflowers in the gorge in the spring. But I also like to go up there when I hear a forecast that says unstable weather. That usually means there's going to be an opening in the weather for some magic to happen. So I ran up Dog Mountain this particular day. I mean, it was raining, hailing. I mean, I took shelter underneath one of those, you know, twisted, gnarly pine Dr. Seuss trees up on top. And just toward the end, it cleared a little bit at sunset. So this is why I always run out whenever I hear in the forecast that there's unstable weather, because that usually means there's going to be a period where there's some magic happening. So all of us can remember where we were or where we chose not to be on when the solar eclipse happened a few years ago. And at first I wasn't going to do anything, as I thought, oh, it's going to be too crowded everywhere. I don't want to join the craziness. But then I gave in and I said, you know what, this is a once in a lifetime thing. Go somewhere. So I decided to go to Smith Rock. So what I did was I went 3 days ahead of time, and I kept practicing to watch where the sun would come up. And so I picked this formation, Monkey Face, and on the day that it arrived, I had no idea that there was going to be a climber, hopefully you can see him or her, on top of Monkey Face, and then someone else doing a tightrope walk. My only regret about this day was that I wish I had two of me, you know, one to just stand there and take it all in and enjoy the beauty and the wonder of it, because people around me were screaming and hollering and crying. And but as a photographer, this is my first attempt ever at trying to shoot a solar eclipse. So I honestly didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I was just bracketing like crazy. And fortunately, I got one good image, but that memory will last a lifetime. So while I mostly like larger landscapes, I'm also drawn toward landscape photography that is a little bit more abstract. And many of you have probably gone to this one particular tree at the Japanese Gardens in Portland. You know, when you first approach it, it's not very impressive. It's pretty small and it has that large sort of umbrella over it. But to get this image, I got down on my knees and crawled underneath the canopy and pointed the camera up with a wide angle lens, because I was really drawn toward the abstract patterns. And I just love abstract stuff in nature. There's so much beauty in the micro side of nature, in addition to the grand landscapes. So this is one of my favorite trees ever. So about 7 years ago, I made a shift in my photography career and life goals and professional goals. I was invited to serve as a volunteer still photographer for a documentary film in Nepal that was being made about a humanitarian gentleman named Jagat Lama. And this is my first time to Nepal. I'd never thought I would get to go in my lifetime, but it was an amazing experience. And this picture here shows a gentleman at a clinic, but this clinic had never been, it did not exist until the year that we came. Imagine a county like twice the size of Hood River with 60,000 people with no medical facility whatsoever. So we were there on the grand opening. And this gentleman is one of hundreds of people who had walked, some people for days to see a doctor. Some people had never seen a dentist before. So this whole experience really opened up my eyes to, what is it I really want to do with my camera? And it just convinced me that I wanted to get more into visual storytelling, into more social justice work, more conservation advocacy. Just was an overwhelming experience. So a couple of years after that trip, if you all remember, there was a massive earthquake, like 8.5 earthquake in Nepal. And this earthquake completely wiped out the entire village where I had visited and gotten to know people. So long story short, I raised a bunch of money here in Hood River, enough money to purchase tin and supplies and building materials to rebuild homes there. While I was there, my friend Jagat, who was the subject of the documentary, introduced me to this young woman, Sumitra Tamang. And he said, Peter, I want you to interview her. And I'm like, what do you mean? What for? He says, just trust me, just talk to her. I'm not a journalist, I'm not an interviewer, but so I just asked her one simple question. I said, what is your dream? And she looked at me, and then she looked at Jagat, and all of a sudden tears just came strolling down her face. And I was like, oh God, what have I done? What have I said to upset this woman? And I asked my friend Jagat, and he says, oh no, he says, no one has ever asked her this before. She had no support from her father. It was just a bad situation, but this was her dream, and no one had ever asked her this before. So I was so impressed by this young woman as I watched her for the couple of days that I was there, being a natural born leader. To make another long story short, I was able to raise enough money from the Hood River Rotary here in town to pay for her entire college education in Nepal. So, again, you see, just by taking a chance, by jumping off the cliffs, so to speak, getting on a plane, going to Nepal, had no idea what I was going to do. But it just opened my eyes and opened my heart to realize that I have the power to affect change. I mean, we all do. It's all about a choice, right? So this is what I have chosen to do. But from that singular experience back in 2013 and then 2015, I made it a critical decision that going forward, that all my work was going to be toward causes that were greater than myself, toward a greater good, whether it's at the local community or on the world stage. And that leads me to this project. Natasha mentioned the book, Healing the Big River, Salmon Dreams and the Columbia River Treaty. For all of you out there who have ever dreamed of doing something amazing, I hope this will inspire you. It took me 14 years from the time I first got the idea to the time it was published in late 2019. I had always wanted to go to the headwaters of the Columbia River. And this image that you see here on the cover of the book is where the river, as a real river, actually begins. And it flows for about 200 miles northward in between two massive mountain ranges. You have the Kootenai Mountains on your right and the Purcell Mountains on the left. And it's just so stunningly beautiful. I mean, the Columbia Gorge is beautiful, but trust me, you should put it on your bucket list to go up to the headwaters of the river. But I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this. I mean, I knew I wanted to do a book, but what was the hook? What was the idea? But in 2015, I became aware of this treaty called the Columbia River Treaty, which was signed between the United States and Canada some 60 years ago. And that original treaty was mostly about water rights and irrigation and hydropower, but it completely ignored the needs of tribes and First Nations, and it did nothing to address, restoring salmon runs. So I thought, aha, that's the story I want to tell. So what I was able to do was just stay on the road off and on for 14 years. I recruited over a dozen First Nation leaders, tribal leaders, and other people who all wanted to see the ecosystem restored and to see the salmon runs potentially restored beyond the Grand Coulee Dam. And this has been a real labor of love. And again, if you ever have a dream about pursuing something, just go for it. Because I had no idea how I was going to pull this off. I don't come from money. I don't know people. I'm not that well connected. I just decided that this was what I was going to do, and I was able to raise money from various corporations and tribes, and it all came together. So just keep dreaming, whatever it is you want to do, find your purpose. On my laptop, I have this little quote from Aristotle that I try to follow. It says, "Where the needs of the world intersect with your talent, there lies your purpose." So that's kind of my standard operating procedure. And this is the actual spot where the water bubbles up from an underground spring that forms the headwaters of the Columbia River. The Portland writer Robin Cody, who you may know, he wrote a book called Voyage of a Summer Sun. He was one of the first people to canoe the whole thing. He had told me, he said, "Peter, you've got to go up there. There's a place where you can straddle the headwaters." I mean, when he told me that, I was like, oh my God, really? Is that really true? So it took a long time to actually find it. But when I did, I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, this is all right, but I need a human, I need the human element. So no one was around. So of course I did what I'm sure a lot of you do, and what Paloma does is put the camera on a tripod and just put yourself in it. So I put it on the tripod, put it on the timer, ran the position, came back, looked at it, and like, oh, that's a piece of crap. Do it again, do it again. So it took a couple hours until I got something that I was satisfied with. But again, it's such a humbling experience to stand where the river begins, literally bubbling up out of the ground, and to know it flows 1,200 miles all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So along the way, as part of this project, I knew that it wasn't going to be just a pretty picture book. I wanted to have environmental portraits and tell stories. This is Alfred Joseph. He was the former leader of the Akiskwanik First Nation tribe up near the headwaters. And he started telling me a story about how back around 1940, his grandfather would go down to the river and wait for the annual return of the salmon. So a week went by, no salmon. A couple of weeks, a couple of months, and they didn't understand, like, where is the salmon? And they thought that they had done something to upset the creator, but they had no way of knowing. Back in 1940, there's no communication, fast communication, cell phone, internet, whatever, to learn that the Grand Coulee Dam had been completed. And that ancient run that had been going all the way up to the headwaters since the beginning of time had been stopped. And as he has said, and other tribal leaders have told me, they've been waiting for over 80 years to see the salmon come home. And it's time for our government and the US government to do right by them. And this was a very poignant moment toward the end of the project. Actually, one of the last photographs that I got. This was just up above the Grand Coulee Dam. I was invited by the Colville tribes to witness what they call a cultural release. They were allowed to do this. But this is the first time in over 80 years that salmon had been reintroduced to the Grand Coulee Dam. And I'm going to read you a brief essay, one of the excerpts from my book. And so just be patient with me, because it'll tell the story and just explain this a little bit. On August 16th, 2019, salmon swam upstream above Grand Coulee Dam, reaching for home for the first time in over 80 years. Invited by the Colville tribes, it was a thrill to bear witness to this symbolic cultural release of 30 salmon back into the waters above the dam. I have been privileged to experience many special moments during my years of working on this book, but this, by far, had the biggest impact on my heart and soul. It was many things: a celebration, a reunion of family and friends, and a coming together of First Nations and tribes who traveled great distances to participate in this historic event. When the truck arrived carrying salmon recently caught downstream below Chief Joseph Dam, emotions poured out, tears flowed, and primal screams of joy echoed across the water. A line was formed to carefully pass each salmon to the water's edge. Children gathered on the shore to touch the backs of the salmon, held gently by a tribal elder before releasing them to freedom. I stood calf deep in the water, composing from a respectful distance, but close enough to feel the electric wonder of a salmon brush up against my leg before darting upstream, like his ancestors since the beginning of river time. In 2001, the life-giving rivers of arteries in me became blocked. If not for emergency surgery, my extinction was certain. Salmon need a bypass system as well at key dams that will ensure not only the survival of the species, but to revitalize the culture, the spirituality, and economic vitality of the people of the river. The Columbia River Treaty renegotiations, now underway, provide the once-in-a-generation opportunity to modernize an agreement that respects and honors Indigenous knowledge and opens the door to revitalizing what was once one of the greatest salmon migrations on the planet. Salmon have proved they are tenacious survivors. Through the chapters of our lives, we are all swimming upstream, seeking safe passage as we reach our way toward home. So that just gives you an example of what's possible. Just by jumping into this project, I had no idea what was going to happen. I just knew I had to do it. And I met people along the way, and I was just guided by my intuition. And again, to have that intersection of my ability and to find a cause that I felt very drawn to and spiritual about it, and just it's been one of the greatest highlights of my life. So with that, I end my presentation, and let's see, I guess I hit stop share, or someone will boot me out. So thank you all, and I will hand it over to Paloma.
Yes, please stop sharing your screen, Peter, and then Paloma will be able to share hers. Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Ready?
Yes, thank you, Paloma. And then if everyone else could just mute while Paloma speaks, of course, to give her the stage. Thank you, Paloma.
Well, thank you, friends of the Columbia Gorge, for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Thank you, Natasha, for organizing and coordinating this event. And thank you, Peter, for sharing this space with me. It is really an honor to me that to be next to you in this panel. You are so well known here in the Gorge, so it is really an honor. Well, my name is Paloma Ayala. I was born and raised in Cuernavaca, Mexico. I studied graphic design and I have a master's in conflict resolution. What got me into photography here in the Gorge is that when I was living in Mexico, I was working for a graphic design agency, and the only type of photography that I was doing was photo product. And I only had my set of lights and my white table and all the products. So it was good, but it was boring. So when I moved to the Gorge, I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, this is beyond words. This is really amazing. So for this presentation, I will show you 3 areas of my photography. They might seem disconnected, but there's a general story that I think links them in different ways. So these areas are agriculture, parenting, and landscape. Let me start with agriculture. So I am based in Hood River, Oregon. When you think of Hood River, you think of water sports, adventure, mountain biking, wine drinking, but rarely you think of the people working in the fields. When I arrived to live to the US, I started hearing more and more in the news the ways media and many other people refer to immigrants as illegal aliens. At the moment when I was doing my master's degree in conflict resolution in Florida, it became clear that those theories of dehumanization and otherness were happening in front of me. When I moved to Hood River, I didn't know of this large population of Hispanic heritage, most of them working at the orchards of the area. Coming to the Gorge was an opportunity that I saw to give face to the people working in the fields and rehumanize their human identity. If you come to the Gorge, it is very easy to get beautiful pictures, I think. The area is very photogenic, but I didn't only wanted to take disconnected pictures. I wanted to connect those images with stories. And I have many images like this. The beautiful landscape for me is just a little fraction of the story. For me, it was more about the working people, the details, the look at their hands, their clothing, listening to the music. So I started asking permission to take pictures of the people working in the fields. So this is a story that I like. This is, I asked this family if I could take pictures of them when they started the day working at a cherry orchard here in Mosher. Their names are Adelina, Junior, Mr. Severino, Felipa, and Ramon. So I asked this family, when do you guys start working? And they said, we start working at 4. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna take pictures of you. And then I thought, I don't think they really start at 4. It's like too early. And plus they are Mexicans and they for sure they are gonna be late. And the next day I show up at 4:15 and they are already waiting for me outside of the cabin. The car is already, the engine is on. I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I was terrified. So they were not so happy to see me that late. So I don't know, I grabbed my camera and I took a picture and they were like super serious. I was like, do you guys mind if you have a smile? And they kind of made us smirk and us. And they are really friendly. Anyway, we drove to the orchard because they were just waiting for me there to drive together to their working place. So once we moved to the orchard, everything goes super fast. So they arrived and Felipa opened the trunk of the car. She's immediately started hitting her fingers and someone else grabbed the radio, crank up the volume, and you can see the lunch box behind. I think it's most likely, I didn't ask, but I'm guessing it's breakfast because we are really early in the morning. And this is summertime. Summertime, we have sunlight really early in the morning. So they start as early as possible so they don't get the super scorching sun above them like around noon. So anyway, they went straight for the ladders and everyone knows which rows they are supposed to be working in. So they go up and down and they grab their buckets. And when I was there, in this case, they spoke Spanish with me, but they didn't speak Spanish between them. They spoke Mixteco. Mixteco is one of the languages of native languages of Mexico. So I really didn't understand what they were saying, but I loved it. It was really amazing that they talk and I was like, I don't know. Anyway, so as they are working, I'm like, Felipa, do you mind if you show me the cherries that you are holding? And she's like, sure. So she shows them to me and I'm like, no, a little bit to the right or to the left. And she's like, hurry up. Because, what they told me is when the trees are full, they fill up a large bin. I'll show you. There's one of those big, large white bins in 1 hour. But when the trees are not that full, it takes them 2-3 hours. So the faster they get them fill up, it's the faster they go. They charge per bean, of course, and the faster they go to rest. So I love this image. It's Felipa, and she's just grabbing from the ladder as she's grabbing more cherries in the other side. So I made all these images, and then I ran later into the Good Fruit Grower magazine. And I submitted some images of this family and they accepted one image. And I think this became my first cover. So the next year, so this family comes from California And they are seasonal workers. They come to Oregon and they work in this orchard for a few weeks and then they leave. They go back to California. So I saw them, hey, guys, I have a surprise. So I brought the cover of the magazine, and Ramon, who is in the cover, he was so happy. It was a very joyful moment because it is very rare that someone, number one, wants to take a picture of them while they are working, and number two, that returns them in the shape of a magazine cover. So he gave me his autograph, and of course, they were super happy. So the next year, I continue taking pictures, and I grabbed the picture of these two men, Mr. Jesus and Vicente. And the next year, they were in the cover. So I gave them the picture. Actually, Mr. Vicente, his daughter, saw the picture before I could even deliver the magazine. And she texted me, she's like, hey, Paloma, we saw my dad in the cover of the magazine. Could you send me the picture again? And I sent it to her. So it was also another joyful moment. So with my images, I want to show the story of hardworking people. I want to show that regardless of the conditions, they show up to work. I want to create a visual memory of them being present and observable. Because when we, for example, enjoy a glass of wine or enjoy eating a pear, we are only focusing on the ending product, but we barely think of how that product made it into our hands. So these guys invited me. They knew I was going to arrive, so I arrived, and when I arrived, they were having lunch. And they asked me if I wanted to have a taco with rice and beans and salsa, of course. And I really liked their generosity. They were really, really kind. They looked very serious, but they were super friendly. They were. So if on a random day, I am passing somewhere and I see someone working, I try to stop, I say hi, and I ask them if I can grab a picture of them. I really want to make observable that they are always working, and the work in the fields never stops. So I want to change now to my other area of photography, and that is documenting lifestyle of parenting here in the Gorge. So I grew up in a small city. It's called Cuernavaca. And I didn't really have much access to green areas. Now that I am a mom, and by the way, my son's name is Oliver. He's 7 years old, and I want him to play as much as possible in the outdoors. So we are living in times where kids are spending most of their time having screen time. And for me, it is very important that he evolves in nature and feels comfortable to be outside. Every single time, once we are out there, he surrenders himself to nature. I can see how nature is his mental fix. I want to shape his early memories where he feels inspired of everything we have done so far. You need to know that every single time it is a challenge to get Oliver out of the house, but I encourage myself and him to go out as much as possible. At school, when he gets asked, what did you do yesterday or something, he always says he only watches TV. So far, that's his story. I hope that in the future he sees all the adventures and he recognizes himself in all the adventures that we have done together. So it is for me, the story behind this, the joy of documenting life in the outdoors, in this magnificent area, because enjoying the outdoors is a right, and the outdoors are for everyone. So he's always getting super muddy, super wet, regardless of the weather. So I always have to bring a change of clothing because I need to, once we make it to the car though. And I try my best that we have, that I document our family in nature. And I hope Oliver becomes a passionate person who can defend the land where we live in and understands the value of it. So here is the beginning of my landscape photography. As I said, I didn't grow up with access to much nature. And when I moved to Hood River, I wanted to change that. I started going out more and more, and every time I go outside, I consider it as my open air classroom. It is my laboratory to experiment. I see it that way. I believe in the importance of admiration, but also preservation. That is why it is important to me to document the beauty of my immediate surroundings. I think this was one of the early pictures I took in, I don't know, 2012, maybe. I think wherever we live in the world, the ecosystem is very fragile, and we need to do everything in our hands to preserve it as much as possible. So here's a capture of the Ravina Hills. I like this new view of it. Is not so common. Mostly it's the curves that you are familiar with. And I also love to grab a lot of details from the landscape. This is the same area as before in the previous picture, but these are the now full of snow. So this is a sunset capture from Viento State Park. And this is one of my favorite images, is from Mount Hood. And as you can see, there's a lenticular on top. And if you are familiar with this area, you should know that it is always changing. There is no one single way to see it and experience it. So I experience it from this particular angle that day, and I love it. And this is one of my super favorite spots. It's the Meyer State Park, just below Ravina. So, oh, another picture. I love this one. This is one of my favorites. So how do I use my skills for the greater good? Well, in 2000, I arrived to the Gorge in 2011. And 2012, I remember I ran into one of the newsletters of a local organization, the Columbia River Keeper. Columbia River Keeper's mission is to protect and restore the water quality of the Columbia River and all life connected to it. So I saw their magazine and I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing information. It's perfect, but the images are not so good quality. So I thought, well, maybe I will grab some of my images, and I compiled a CD. I put them all together, and I went to the office and I said, hey guys, if by any chance you need any of these pictures for your newsletter, use them as you want to. So they were really, oh, thank you so much. And so I was donating these pictures. And by the way, when I say donating pictures, this really means a lot to me. As a photographer, this means investing time and taking the picture, going to the location, investing in gear, time for editing images. And it is really more than just sharing a picture. So 2016, for the people living in this area remembers, there was the Mosher derail. So this day I was taking pictures in an orchard, And from the far away, I saw this big fume. And when I made it home, and right away, I got the phone call from Brett van der Heuvel, so who is the executive director of the Columbia River Keeper. And he says, hey, Paloma, I am wondering if you will be able to take some captures. The derailment in Mosher, there was a derailment in Mosher that just happened, and we want to grab some images. So I said, oh my gosh, Brett, my batteries are empty and I really don't have anything. So he says, how long does it take to charge? And I'm like, well, a lot of time, but at least maybe 20 minutes. And he says, okay, you can go, there's a boat and there's an airplane. And I said, I will take the boat because I don't like airplanes. And he says, okay, so we hang up. And 2 minutes later, he calls and he says, well, you're going in the airplane, I'll meet you at the airport in 20 minutes. And I was like, okay. So I went to the airport and I got into the airplane, very, very little one. It was just the pilot, and behind him, it was me. I couldn't even grab my backpack because the airplane is so small. So we took off, and when we were in the area, flying, he opens the windows, and I was so scared, and he's like, don't worry, it's fine. So I took the pictures, and the next day, we took some drone shots. We had access through one of the back roads in this area, and I flew my drone, and we got, so Union Pacific pushed the cars to the side in a rush to reopen the line. So some of the cars, they still had oil in there. And the previous day, there was an explosion. So it was very questionable what they were doing. But anyway, we got those images. So these images have been requested by many groups working in the prevention of incidents like this, and have been shared for educational purposes as well. So I also, 2017, I also captured a few images of the Eagle Creek fire that happened here in the gorge. That day I had to go to Portland, and on my way back, I decided to stop at the parking lot of Dog Mountain. There were many people witnessing from their cars what was happening across the river. It was very disheartening to see how these big embers of fire flew from one side to the other, and suddenly they lit immediately the sky in a very intense red color. So, as you know, just a couple of months ago, here in the gorge, we had a severe week of hazardous smoke due to the fires in California and Oregon. So with the climate change, the fires are realities that are already with us more and more, and will impact us increasingly. Overall, I believe in the power of visual documentation. I am hoping that education plus political and civic engagement make us better at taking decisions to protect the places that we live in. So what does that all mean to me to take pictures in the gorge? I see my pictures as different and unique ways to explain what happens in the same land from different perspectives and angles of interest. And to wrap up, I would like to share one of my multiple dreams, which is that more women from different backgrounds are empowered, number one, to go out and enjoy the outdoors, and number two, feel the necessity to document the surroundings and events of the places we live in. I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. And I will stop the sharing, but I don't know how to say. Oh, stop share. Got it.
Yeah. Thank you, Paloma. That was amazing. Thank you, Peter. Again, thank you for sharing your amazing work with us and your stories with us. We're now going to go into Q&A. Again, please type all your questions for Paloma and Peter into the Q&A box below in that black toolbar, and we'll get to them as quick as we can. To start us off, I do have one question that is for the both of you that I believe all the photographers who have joined us tonight would like to hear and know, and that is, I guess, what would you tell them before they photograph in the gorge, whether they're a new photographer, beginning whatnot, but if they're just new to the gorge area, what are some tips that you would share with photographers that they may not be aware of when photographing in the gorge? And either of you can just take it.
Well, I think I'll just jump in. People have often asked me, what's the best light? What's good light and what's bad light? And honestly, there's no such thing as bad light. It's all about what you're trying to photograph. So for example, if you're trying to photograph waterfalls and you want that kind of moody, silky smooth look, you want to go out on a somewhat rainy, overcast day, because that diffuses the light, and that's how you can capture fantastic waterfalls. The other most important thing, even though this is the age of digital and far too many people rely on their computer to fix things, embellish things, and all that, I still believe that it's all about the good light. If you want that really warm landscape thing, within that first hour, the magic hour, first hour of the day, last hour of the day, if you want really warm light. And I also recommend that you study the landscape, because the Columbia River runs pretty much in an east-west line, and you have to get out. You can't just go out and expect to create a beautiful photograph. You have to study the landscape. You have to make many, many trips. I often say it's like a minimum of 3 is, or there's the discovery moment, then there's you go out and look at the site, study what the light possibilities are, and then go out and then hope that the weather gods take pity on you after waiting for 3 or 4 days or sometimes weeks to try to get a shot. So that would be one thing I would say.
I agree with Peter. I will also add that wherever you are, it's important to respect the guidelines of the locals. Like if there is a closure or a no trespassing sign, I think those are things that, speak first of ourselves as persons and also as our profession as photographers. And I think we need to be understand the implications of us setting a good example, and of course everything that Peter mentioned.
Thank you. And then in the Q&A from Tim, this is for each of the photographers. How do you decide to use color versus black and white format?
Well, I've always been a color guy. Just by choice, I grew up shooting film, and I was probably one of the last of my professional colleagues to switch to digital because I so enjoyed film. I was shooting a medium format Pentax 2¼ by 2 3/4 film, and I just always preferred the mystery and magic of film, and I just loved the color. Yeah, I think I just grew up just observing the color and falling in love with color and wanting to translate color. Perhaps someday I'll switch to black and white, and I know you can do that very easily in Photoshop, but yeah, not at this stage in my career. Maybe later on when I'm old and can't walk around very much, I'll go outside and do close-ups of leaves in my backyard or something and do it in black and white. But for now, I'm still excited and inspired by color.
In my case, it really depends on the mood of the photography, and the images I chose to present today are all, I think, all in color except for one. I think it depends on the mood that I want to inspire or project in the image. So that's how I decide whether I go for black and white or color.
Thank you. From Sharon, this is for Peter. Is Spirit Falls accessible now via hiking if you don't have a permit for the private property around there?
Not sure how to answer that without getting in trouble. There is, I'm not part of the kayaking community, and kayakers know where to put in and do their thing. I was just directed many years ago to a certain spot along the highway where you can bushwhack your way down and witness this. There is a trail way down by the top of the falls, but getting there, again, it was just a bushwhack. And actually, if you want some guidance, that's been published in Scott Cook's Curious Gorge, there is some mention of that in that book. So I would encourage you to pick up his book and just follow your gut if you want to do it or not. There is poison oak down there, so be very careful.
Perfect. And then here we go. From Christy, both of you, do you both develop your pictures in a dark room?
Not anymore. Not since, well, depends on what you mean. I'm not shooting film anymore, so everything is digital, and it's just shot in RAW format, which is literally what it sounds like. It just captures everything, the raw details, and it creates a much larger file when you want to make a big print. So in my case, I shoot a Nikon D810, and the final file, when I save it, is about 210 megabytes, which is rather large, and you can do a lot of great things with that. So I'm not a great fan of Photoshop because I grew up shooting film, and I still behave when I'm out in the field as if I can't screw up and I want to get it right, because I really don't want to spend time on the computer. I just want to get the shot, save it, and that's that. So there is such a thing as a digital darkroom where there are just thousands of toys and tools that you can use, but I try not to go anywhere near that stuff because I'm just pretty old school where that's concerned.
I grew up, first when I was learning photography, I developed my film, but I don't do that anymore. My dark room is my light room in Photoshop. I love my software. They are amazing. And I think we need to use the technology as it is happening right now.
Great. And then for the both of you, is it wrong to use filter enhancers?
Whew. Again, that's a very subjective question. I don't criticize anyone who wants to do that stuff. My comment would be that nature, if you get out and get out there when the light is gorgeous and magical, that you don't need any enhancements. So I try to steer away from that. I think the only thing I use occasionally is a polarizing filter, which just helps, especially when you're doing waterfalls or if you want to cut down on contrast or reflection. But that's all I use.
I think personal choice, number one, and I don't see them wrong. I think they, for many people, many photographers, are a starting point. And I think photography is a visual art, and all these filters or however options that we have now available are just a way to experiment. Nothing happens. We are not changing reality. Reality is there. Nature is there. What we do with the images is something else. Once we make everything fit in one square or whatever, is not the whole reality. That is just a fraction of it. So I am personally, I love to experiment. sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I go back to my raw file and I start from scratch. So I don't see it the wrong way. I think we have now a million of opportunities, and really relies on everyone's choices and personal likes.
For the both of you, in your experience, how do you get pictures of people being natural or in their natural setting without making them feel uncomfortable? Some tips for just photographing people and trying to, I guess, make them feel comfortable in their natural feeling.
Paloma, you do more people photos. I'll let you go first.
Okay, so well, number one, I have few big lenses that helps me get distance from my subject. Let's say orchard type of photography. I like to disappear. They don't even think I am. They know I am there, but they don't know where I am because I go in the bushes, behind the branches, or wherever. So they are just working. They are, if they're working, they are not posing for me. As I said, the more the cherries, the faster they get them, the faster they go home. So they are not there for me. If, let's say, other cases, I talk to people first, and I said, this is your photo shoot. This is for yourself. So I want you to be you. And I think I'm pretty easygoing, so they feel relaxed from the beginning. And as I said, my lenses help. I take distance and I say, go do this, and they do that. Or if it's a candid picture, it really depends on what type of photo shoot we are talking about. But I also love candid pictures, just like being far, not present, hidden.
Yeah, I would say as primarily a landscape photographer, but in the last few years, having shifted to do more environmental documentation that involves people. I also like to just sort of have it happen accidentally or naturally. Let's say I'm up at Lost Lake, for example, and there's somebody on a boat or a kayak going by. It's paying attention to what's going on and capitalizing on the moment. But I'm also pretty comfortable if there's somebody who's nearby me, I just go up to them and say, hey, I'm working on this project. I always ask permission. I never just try to take a picture and then walk away. I mean, there are those times when someone, like Paloma was saying, they're very far away and you have a big lens. Someone's hiking on a trail and you just want to get small person, big mountain. And as long as you don't see their face or cannot recognize them, it's okay to go ahead and take that photo without seeking their permission. But you really need to seek permission if you can see their face and if you're going to use it in any way, whether it's professional or donating it to a nonprofit. It just bodes well for the future when you always ask permission.
Favorite camera? Both of your favorite cameras that you prefer to use.
Yeah.
I didn't have the question.
Oh, you didn't hear me? Sorry. Favorite cameras for the both of you. What are your favorite cameras to use?
Well, I've been using the same camera now for about, gosh, 6-7 years. It's the Nikon D810. I progressively worked I've always been a Nikon guy, with the exception of when I was shooting medium format film. It was a Pentax 6.7. But when film became harder to purchase and fewer places were developing film, I was sort of forced kicking and screaming into digital. But I went with the Nikon D810 because it's almost the equivalent of a medium format camera in terms of what it can produce and what it can do. Honestly, I probably only know about 10 to 15% of all the bells and whistles that are on these massive cameras today. There's so much to learn. But again, because I'm just basically interested in getting the image and witnessing it as I saw it and sharing it with the public as I saw it, I'm very happy with what I have. And I don't upgrade that often because if it's working for me, it's fine. Plus, cameras are not cheap. So I'm very happy with what I have.
The best camera for me is, I think, the one you have in your hands at the moment. So what I have right now, it's a Canon 5DS, and sometimes I only have my phone, and sometimes my phone gets me to capture images that when I didn't have my big camera. But yeah, it is a technical thing, as in many photographers are just looking for the new upgrade, and I think that's great if you can afford it. If not, whatever you have, I think that's the best option at the moment.
Yeah,
so
I would also.
It's not. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paloma.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, while it's coming back to you, now I just forgot what I was going to say. This is terrible. Oh my God. Well, what I was going to say is so many times people come up to me and say, you know, I don't understand. I try to get this shot and then my stuff doesn't look like you. The first thing I say is, did you take the time to read through your manual and understand your camera? Because I think there's just too many people who want instant results. If you want that, then you just use your cell phone. But if you really want to explore in-depth, fine art with a larger professional camera, really got to get to know your equipment. I mean, it's as simple as that.
And Paloma, did you want to talk about what, did it come back to you? If it didn't, no big deal. We'll move on. Okay, no worries. I don't know if either of you might know this, but Jeremy is wondering, is drone photography allowed in the gorge? You know, do either of you use drones for your work?
I'll let Paloma take this. I do not use drones, and so she will know.
So my drone is right now out of commission. So when I was flying it, I always flew it from private property. So I always had the permission of the person in that place. So the 2-3 aerials that I got are from the property of my client in that specific time. And the other one, the drone shots for the motion derailment, I don't recall the specifics. I remember the airspace was closed, but I was with the pilot next to me. So it was through him, because you need to be with in those type of cases, I had to be with him, and he's also part of the, one of the, this is not relevant, but he is a lawyer that was working for the Columbia Riverkeeper. Anyway, in that case, I was with him and we were safely or legally doing it. But yeah, I don't really know what's the update of the regulations, but I don't think you can fly from everywhere. Mount Hood, the wilderness area, is not, it's a no zone, not a drone zone. I don't think that you can launch from state parks. I really don't know. I will need to have an update regarding that. But as I said, I don't have my drone right now.
Natasha, I could chime in here briefly too. Hey everybody, this is Ryan. I'm the conservation organizer with Friends, and I've done drone photography in the gorge as well. If you want to launch from a state or federal land site, you need to get permission from that agency. That's going to be very difficult to do. Some of them will let you, but you'll often have to start an application process weeks, if not months in advance. If you have a boat, it is legal to launch drones from the river without any permit or anything like that. The most important thing is to be aware of FAA flight paths to make sure what altitudes you're going to be flying at, and to make sure you have clearance to not be interfering in any flight paths. There are 2 small airports in the gorge, one near Hood River and one out in Dallas Port. So those are the main things you should be aware of. And there is a website. There are many sources on Google that you can just Google. There is detailed Oregon law on flying drones. if you need more information, feel free to email me.
Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate that. Also, U.S. Forest Service will have some info on their website as well regarding drone use.
The rules are really, they change, they get updated very often. So that is something to consider whenever you get a drone, that you have the most updated information.
Yes, thank you for adding that. So we are out of time, everybody. I really want to thank everyone for sending in their questions to the Q&A. I'm really sorry that we can't get to everybody. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Peter and Paloma, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy lives to do this with us. I apologize again for being a few minutes late. It's just sometimes tech issues happen in this world of tech that we are using. So again, thanks so much. Have a great night. And thank you, Peter and Paloma again.
Thank you. Bye, Paloma.
Bye, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Natasha.